You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got an update from Fulton County DA Fanni Willis on her decision about whether or not to bring charges against Trump for his effort to get Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes that didn't exist. Can you walk us through that update?
Based on what I heard District Attorney Fanni Willis say in court today, it's actually a pretty big deal. And it signals, I think, in the most concrete and direct way that we have heard yet out of the mouth of a prosecutor in or out of court. It signals that indictments are coming for Donald Trump. Here's why I say that. First of all, the backdrop is Fanni Willis has spent the last several months before a special grand jury in Georgia. Georgia has this kind of funky two grand jury system where one grand jury, the regular grand jury, hears evidence, but only evidence from witnesses who are willing to appear voluntarily. If the grand jury needs to use a subpoena in order to compel the testimony of somebody who doesn't want to testify, under the Georgia procedures, that goes over to a special grand jury. The special grand jury has now heard from 75 witnesses. And then the next step in the special grand jury is they write a report with the assistance of the prosecutors assessing the evidence. And the special grand jury makes recommendations about whether anybody should be criminally charged, should be indicted. Then that report goes back over to the regular grand jury that has the power to indict people. So what went on in court in Georgia today was that report that has been issued by the special grand jury. There are news organizations that want that to be made public. And Georgia actually has some open records laws that says, generally speaking, reports should be made public unless making them public would compromise an ongoing investigation. So District Attorney Willis was in court today arguing to the judge, we cannot make this public yet. And it's what she told the judge as her reason for objecting to the report being made public that was actually pretty earth-shaking. And I want to quote her words directly. Here's what she said to the judge. She said, "We think for future defendants, plural defendants, to be treated fairly, it's not appropriate at this time to have the report released." And then she said that charging decisions are imminent. Listen, Fanni Willis is a very careful, thoughtful, understated prosecutor. She has been sawing the justice wood in front of her month after month, defeating every single witness who was trying to avoid appearing before the grand jury. People like Rudy Giuliani and Mike Flynn and Lindsey Graham. These men, air quotes, desperately didn't want to appear before the grand jury and be forced to testify about the Georgia state election crimes of Donald Trump. She took every one of them to court and she beat each and every one. And they all testified before that Georgia special grand jury. So when she now says, and she has the special grand jury report in hand and its recommendations as to who to indict, when she tells a judge, we can't release this report because that would be unfair to the defendants who are about to be charged imminently. That's earth-shattering. Brian, that's the most direct and most concrete thing we've heard out of the mouth of any prosecutor who is investigating Donald Trump in or out of court. And it really does tell me, it got my justice juices flowing, and it really does tell me that Fanni Willis is close to indicting, I believe, Donald Trump and others for their Georgia state election crimes.
Man, what would it take to get Merrick Garland to take a page out of Fanni Willis's book? Just pretty stark contrast here. Glenn, just to be crystal clear here, in the legal world, what does imminent mean? Are we looking at hours, days, weeks? What are we looking at?
So we don't know precisely if when Fanni Willis says imminent, she means that indictments are likely to come in days or weeks or months. But here's something we do know. Today was not only the day that DA Willis went into court to urge the judge not to release the report because it would be unfair to the defendants who are about to be imminently charged. We know today was also the day that the regular grand jury came back in session. So I think what we can tease out of that is Fanni Willis is probably right now, or, presently in the coming days, going to be back before that regular grand jury with the report that was issued by the special grand jury. And she's going to be urging the regular grand jury, I believe, and I think we can reasonably infer, to begin returning indictments. So if I had to bet a buck, that's my betting limit, I'm not a high roller, I would say we're going to see indictments perhaps within the next 2-3 weeks.
Okay. So let's say that DA Willis does ultimately decide to come forward and bring charges against Trump. What happens next in Fulton County? What's the timeline here?
Yeah, so timeline is always challenging in a criminal case. Here is the rule of thumb. Prosecutors always want to go to trial yesterday, and defense attorneys always want to go to trial tomorrow. Why? Prosecutors want to strike while the iron is hot, while memories of witnesses are fresh, and before evidence begins to, go missing, or there are other challenges that prosecutors encounter as sort of time, draws on. Defense attorneys, and this is not a criticism, it's just the way the system operates.
Yeah.
Defense attorneys want to push trials out as far into the future as possible. Why? They want witness memories to fade. They want evidence to go missing. They want people to become unavailable. Brian, I once had a sole eyewitness in a murder case, and unfortunately, that eyewitness died of a heart attack of natural causes before we could get the case to trial. I had to dismiss the case because I didn't have a living witness I could call. Yeah. So delay is a defense attorney's friend and a defendant's friend. If I had to guess, once the indictments are returned and Donald Trump is presented in court on that indictment and he is arraigned, in other words, he's formally read the charges that the grand jury has leveled against him, we'll probably see a trial date set somewhere between 6 months to a year down the road. But the defense attorney will forever trying to be filing motions to continue to push it further and further down the road. I think 1 year from the time the indictment drops is a pretty good rule of thumb as to when we're likely to see a trial.
Okay, and what are Trump's options to appeal once we get to this first trial? Because, obviously he's not going to accept any verdict that goes against him. So what are his appeal options moving forward? Just gaming this out into the future.
Yeah, gaming it out is great because I think we've become used to Donald Trump, who is an especially nefarious litigant, right? He's always trying to weaponize the system for PR value, not because he really has a viable claim in court. Here's the good news. Everything that we've seen Donald Trump do to delay court proceedings, those games can only be played in civil cases. Once you are charged criminally, it's out of your hands. So you no longer can take appeals of every single ruling that a judge makes. The only time you get to appeal in a criminal case is after you've gone to trial, been convicted, and been sentenced. That is when your ability to file an appeal of your conviction arises for the first time. Now, if he goes to trial and is convicted, which based on the fact that his crime was committed over the phone and it was recorded, right, just find me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner, or else, he told Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, that is the crime under Georgia law of soliciting election fraud. So he should be convicted. Once he is sentenced, that's when he'll have his only opportunity to appeal his conviction. And an appeal can take a good long time to wind its way through the appellate courts.
And can you appeal just because you don't like the decision, or do you have to appeal based on something that you think wasn't done properly or correctly in the courtroom?
So I will say that almost every felony conviction is appealed. Why? Because you have a right to appeal your conviction, and some folks will just file that notice of appeal, and then they'll try to gin some issue up. Their lawyer will try to gin some issue up, some defect in the trial that worked to the prejudice of the defendant. So the reality is, in a criminal case, you don't really need a strong legal issue in order to file an appeal. Most cases are appealed. I will also say the vast majority of appeals in criminal cases are affirmed on appeal. The convictions are not reversed, they're not busted, new trials are not ordered, the overwhelming majority of cases in criminal cases that are appealed result in those cases being affirmed on appeal.
And with this case, just continuing to game this out, is there a possibility that this case could go upon appeal to some political allies of Donald Trump? Like, is there, I guess, what court would it go to next where Trump might have the opportunity to have it landed in somebody's lap who's sympathetic to him?
Yeah, I don't know if this is better or worse, but this will be a state prosecution. So what does that mean? It means if he's convicted and he appeals his conviction, it will go to a Georgia state appellate court where those judges have, I believe, been appointed by the governor. And so it's an open question as to whether those judges might be hard right, hard left, down the middle in their sort of judicial philosophy and approach to handling cases. But what we know is that there will be no Trump appointees on the Georgia State Appellate Court because those are not federal appointments.
Got it. Okay, let's finish off with this. What are the possible punishments in this case? Are they monetary, political, prison time? What are we looking at?
So they are primarily prison time. The Brookings Institute did a great deep dive on all of the potential Georgia state crimes that Trump committed. And they came up with, I believe, more than a dozen felonies and misdemeanors alike. So here's what I'll say. If he is convicted of all of the crimes he committed under Georgia state law, he's looking at many years in jail. He's probably also looking at monetary fines. And there are no political penalties that are available under the Georgia state law, but the political fallout for somebody who claims he's running again for the presidency, the office he tried to steal 2 years ago, you would think that the political ramifications are pretty significant.
You would think, but this might be a situation where that might actually empower him even further because you know how he likes to use his own victimization to help himself politically. I do have to ask this one actual last question here, and that is, what is the slap on the wrist version of what we can expect to see here as far as punishment's concerned if they do go ahead and return a guilty verdict?
The slap on the wrist version would be probation.
Okay.
It would be either no time in prison, or it could be a sentence. I'm not completely up to speed on what the Georgia state statutes say with respect to home detention in lieu of confinement in a penal institution. But what I will say generally, most jurisdictions do have the ability to sentence somebody to home confinement, particularly as we were kind of working our way through the pandemic. There were lots of jurisdictions that instead of putting people in prison, because it's kind of hard to socially distance in prison, they would sentence people to home confinement, home detention, house arrest, that kind of thing. Often that involves an ankle bracelet, an electronic monitor that can alert the authorities if you violated a condition of your home detention. But I have to tell you, as a former career prosecutor, Brian, when I saw, for example, white collar criminals who bilked people out of millions and millions of dollars, when I saw them get sentenced to home detention instead of prison proper, it always felt to me like the judge was sentencing that person to basically, stream Netflix and order DoorDash.
And by the way, that's what he's doing.
Sentence.
That's what he's doing right now. I mean, he's confining himself to his beach resort where he can, pop down to the omelet bar and do his rants on a weekly basis to whatever wedding party is in the building about, how Hunter Biden's the worst thing to ever happen in this country. But he's doing that right now. So it really would be a shame if, looking to the future, that is what happens. But as soon as we get any updates on this case, we'll of course bring it to you. With that said, if you want to follow more legal news, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.